Good morning, or depending when you're listening to this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and I was always told I had a voice for radio, so I've made a podcast all about the Pokémon trading card game. And you're listening to PTCG Radio. Now, we have a lot to get through this week, because the scans for Phantom Forces, this is a new set in Japan, which will be our November set, have now been revealed. So I think it's only fair we have a look through these. Now, I may also stick on the end of this podcast a report from a league challenge I went to, my very first of the season this past week. I like to stick these on the end nowadays because some people have got in touch and said they really like hearing these, and they like hearing my descriptions of games. And other people have got in touch and said that it's not their favourite part of the podcast. So what I do is, I don't know if I'll have time to do it today, but if I do, I'll pop it on at the very end of the podcast. So those of you that don't really dig listening to that, and just want to hear my analysis of the Phantom Forces cards can get your wish, and people who want to hear my league challenge and how that went and the games I played this past weekend, you guys will be able to listen into that. If I don't get a chance to pop it on today, I will of course make sure that I pop it onto next week's podcast. We'll have to wait and see. As a side note, the league challenge I went to this past week was a fantastically fun time, made all the better by the fact that I was able to record a game from each of the 4 rounds this past week. So even if you're not interested in my account of the games, you should very much be interested in the 4 games I recorded. Now, I need to add commentary to them, but I would imagine the first one going up, that's my round 1 game, my Seismitoad Garbodor, against a lovely chap named Ben's Trevenant Donphan, should be going up, I would imagine, somewhere in the region of Monday. And then you should see another one on Wednesday, and then a couple more rounding out in a week or two's time. So a couple of bits of news before we get going here. A Gallade EX promo has been announced in Japan. It's going to go out to players at Japanese tournaments, just like Crocodile EX last year. Now, we ended up getting Crocodile EX as a full-on promo card that was released in the Crocodile EX box, and never made its way into any of the sets proper. Gallade, we'll have to wait and see how we get that, but there's a chance it's going to be the same kind of thing. It's also been announced that the trainer kit is coming out. It's coming out in November, and it's going to feature Bisharp and Wigglytuff. Now, these are the kits. I actually bought one of these a while ago, which was Zoroark and Excadrill. They did a Noivern and Sylveon one, I think, more recently. These are ones where you get 2 30-card decks, and they're very much designed to help people learn to play. If you're not, if you are an established player, as I know the vast majority of people listening to this will be, there might not be too much of a call for you to actually go ahead and get this, but they're kind of cool, and I suppose the number one reason to get this, really, other than the really quite adorable Pikachu coin, is that you do find in this that you actually get some, you get weird little set symbols on these. So any trainers that you get in these do have weird little set symbols. Certainly the ones that I got, like I said, I bought the one with Zoroark and Excadrill, and these had cool little Zoroark and Excadrill set symbols, and I had a Pokemon Communication Switch, etc. that had them in, so they were kind of cool. They weren't amazing, but they were kind of cool. And that's pretty much the news for this week. So we're going to get straight into my analysis of the cards that you need to be looking at from Phantom Forces. Now, we've already gone through a bunch of these. We've already seen Manectric EX and Mega Manectric EX. And essentially, the ones we've already seen, I'm going to give you a very quick recap and we're going to move on. These are awesome and allow you to attach energy from your hand and have pretty good attacks, but they're fighting weak. We've seen a Crobat line, which has a really quite cool ability, just like Crobat G's Flash Bite, but I don't know if it's going to be enough to build a deck around by itself. We've seen Gengar EX and Mega Gengar EX, which I think can be a deck themselves and look very cool. We've seen Chandelure EX, just regular Chandelure, which has a cool little ability Fainting Spell, but isn't necessarily a good enough attacker to make it on its own. We've seen Hydreigon that has a cool ability for dark decks, but may be annoying to get out being a stage 2. We've seen Head Noiser, the trainer card which, the tool which you attach to your opponent's Pokemon and ups their attack cost, which looks kind of cool and annoying, but are you going to find room for it? We've seen the supporter card As, which is very meh. Dimensional Valley, which reduces the attack cost of Psychic Pokemon, the Stadium card, which I think is going to be fantastic. Mystery Energy, which reduces the retreat cost of Psychic Pokemon, that looks pretty cool. Bronzong, which is just like E-Electric, but for metal Pokemon, so it attaches metal from the discard pile, and that's going to be huge. We've seen Dialga EX, which was too expensive in terms of its attack cost until Bronzong was revealed, and Aegislash EX, which has a nice little ability which blocks attacks from Pokemon with special energy attached, but is most likely to be played as part of a toolbox with other metal Pokemon. There we go. They're the ones we've already seen. So, a lot of these Pokemon, this set can really be summed up in terms of cool attack, never going to be used. There are a huge number of Pokemon in this set that have really funky little attacks, but I just don't see how anyone's ever going to get to use these attacks in a real game. So that's the majority of the Pokemon I'm going to go through, but they're kind of cool, and I suppose a nice way to sum it up would be that a lot of Pokemon in this set have the ability to be the basis for some pretty funky road decks down the line. So first off, we have Venomoth, and we're going to go basically in set order. So we're going to go through the types here. So starting off with Grass, we've got Venomoth, a Stage 1, 90 HP, nothing particularly spectacular, but it's got an ability for a Grass Energy. During your opponent's turn, whenever your opponent tries to play a trainer card, your opponent must flip a coin. If tails, your opponent cannot use the effect of that card, and the card is discarded. An awesome little tech which could be used in any grass-based deck, but it's a Stage 1 and it takes your attack. Now, this obviously will bring back memories of Slowking for those of you that played back in the day. That was a card which got banned in tournament play because it was a misprint from the Japanese, and in the Japanese card it was if Slowking is active, every time your opponent plays a trainer, flip a coin. If tails, it does nothing. But the misprint just said if Slowking was in play. So you could get 4 of these out and they would stack. So your opponent would have to hit, 3 or 4 heads in a row to use each trainer card. I mean, I wasn't playing at the time. It sounds like a really slow, annoying game if your opponent's got to flip 4 coins for every trainer card. But this was back before supporters were supporters, so every trainer card, supporter, etc. needed this. This is nothing like the same. It gives a 50-50 chance, but the card is still discarded if they flip a tails here. So it could work as a nice little disruption card. You get Garbodor out to block abilities, and then essentially this comes out, and your opponent can end up discarding all their trainer cards without using it. It's got 90 HP, so it ain't going to last for long, and it's flippy, and it's, you're not going to be able to use this till your second turn of the game, and then it's using your attack. So I don't think it's going to be great, but I could see a fun little deck where you, for instance, use Venomoth, and then you use the card we've talked about. I think it might be a Victory Bell, where you discard a Grass Energy, it poisons and confuses the Pokemon. So I could see a fun little deck where we use something like a Garbodor and a Venomoth. Oh, you couldn't use a Garbodor if you were using Victory Bell. But you could, for instance, use Victory Bell, Hypnotoxic Laser, etc. to pile on special conditions while you blocked all of their trainer cards. I don't think it's good, but it's out there, it's a possibility. Now there is a funky little Stage 1 Yanmega that if it was a basic, it would be amazing. It's got a lovely little attack for a Grass Energy, shuffle your hand into your deck, draw 6 cards. And it's got free retreat. It'll be an awesome consistency Pokemon as a basic, but again, you don't want to be using this on your second turn of the game as a consistency card. You'd be much better off with something like Spiritomb. It does have a cool little attack for free colourless energy that does 50 damage, and if this Pokemon was switched from the bench during this turn, it does 50 more. That's going to one-hit a Seismitoad for free grass energy. And you could retreat into it or switch into it, etc. But I really don't think it's going to be amazing in the long run. Another interesting card is Lavani. Now this has an attack for a single grass energy. Choose up to 2 Pokemon on your bench that do not have tools attached to them, and search your deck for a Pokemon tool and attach it to them. Again, we're talking about a Stage 2, and we're talking about an attack on your second turn of the game, so it's another one of these that would be great on a basic for 1 energy, but on a Stage 2, it's not really going to cut the mustard. It's kind of cool to search for Pokemon tool cards, but honestly, you could just play the supporter from Radiant Collection. I want to say Iris? No. I'll come back to you in a minute with the name of that supporter card. But there was a supporter in Radiant Collection which allowed you to search for, I think, free Pokemon tools. And then you could obviously attach them from your hand, and obviously using a using a supporter, although annoying, is far less onerous than actually using than using your attack. So I love the idea, but it's not really going to cut it in the long run, I'm afraid. I think Levani is kind of doomed to be one of these Pokemon that has continually interesting cards that no one's ever going to play. It was Elisa, the supporter card from Radiant Collection. There we go. The next Pokemon I want to talk about is Pyroar. Pyroar looks like it's going to be one of those cards, kind of like Gengar, where every time it's released, it's interesting. No, maybe not amazing, but interesting. Now, Pyroar has got an ability Flare Command. Once during your turn, you may discard a fire energy attached to this Pokemon. If you do, choose one of your opponent's bench Pokemon and switch it with your opponent's active Pokemon. So it's kind of like Red Signal, except you discard, not attach. Now, this could potentially be slightly better in that, for instance, with Genesect, you'd have to attach it and then do the switching before you played any kind of supporter. Whereas with Pyroar, you could attach it, drags, and then, you could then play a supporter, and then if you hit a switch to get what you want active, you can discard and use the gusting effect. Whereas if you attach to Pyroar, hoping to hit a switch off a Juniper, but you don't hit the switch, you can then keep the energy on the Pyroar and not discard it. Now, we're talking about a very niche kind of play here, but there are those signals where you want the gusting effect, but you only want the gusting effect if you can hit a switch or some other card, and what Pyroar allows you to do is attach the energy and then play a supporter or a bicycle, etc., looking for this extra card without being forced into the gusting effect, whereas with something like Red Signal, you are forced into the gusting effect. Now, don't get me wrong, it's going to be very rare that happens, but it's an option. The best thing about Pyroar is you've got Blacksmith, that supporter card that allows you to attach 2 fire energy from your discard pile, so this doesn't have to be your attachment for the turn. Another plus it has over Genesect's Red Signal ability. That's the obvious kind of advantage here, but the obvious thing with which you're going to compare it, the obvious comparison. But for those reasons I've just outlined, it's actually potentially slightly better. Now, it does have a garbage attack, 4 energy, 3 fire and a colourless for 110 damage, and it does 30 to itself. But this really isn't an attacking Pokemon. What you would do with this is you would have this on the bench as a tech, and you would be attacking with regular Pyroar. The one that blocks, the one that's actually got a better attack, but also it blocks your opponent's basic Pokemon from attacking. And this would be an amazing tech, because you could, for instance, Blacksmith onto this twice, and that means that, if your opponent gets a Garbodor, or a Trubbish, you can gust it, and you could do that twice. Obviously, if your opponent gets a Garbodor with a tool, that will knock off this ability. But what it does mean is, if they put a Trubbish down, you can gust it up, or you can play a startling Megaphone and then gust it up. Again, another bonus over Red Signal, you don't have to hit the startling Megaphone and the energy in one turn. You can leave the energy on this Pyroar and then activate the ability as soon as you hit a startling Megaphone to turn off Garbodor's ability and turn Pyroar's back on. If you play any kind of Pyroar-based deck, this has to go in there. But I could see this being a tech in any fire-based deck, much more reliable than Pokemon Catcher and Lysandra. You don't have to use your supporter for the turn, you don't have to rely on a coin flip, and you can just leave it on the bench. Now, of course, if you're leaving it on the bench, your opponent can gust it up and kill it, but then they're not going after your attacker. This is, for my mind, one of the best cards in the set, and one which I think is going to see a lot of play. Going into water and going back to cool cards which are cool but aren't going to see any play, for Alligator. It's got a really nice attack for a water and a double colourless. 60 damage, flip a coin until you get tails for each head, discard an energy attached to your opponent's active Pokemon. This could be devastating. Now, I don't think you're ever going to really get there, because you're basically relying on getting a Stage 2 out with free water energy, a water and a double colourless, but a Stage 2 with free energy, and then you've got to start flipping and hitting heads. So it's far from the most reliable plan in the world, but let's face it, how much fun would it be if you were able to get this active against, maybe a an Evil Tower with a bunch of energy on, or a Lugia with 4 energy on. You could even gust up, and by the way, when I say gust, for those that are slightly newer to the game, when I say gust, I'm referring to anything which takes an opponent's bench Pokemon and brings it active. This would include Pokemon Catcher, Lysandra, Genesect's Red Signal, the new Pyral's ability, Ninetales Bright Look, etc. Anything that which allows you to choose whichever of your opponent's bench Pokemon you like and bring it active. And if they're building up something on the bench with loads of energy, you could bring it active and knock the energy off. Now, it's a stage 2, it takes free energy, and even then it's flippy. So I don't think it's going to be good, and I don't think it's going to see much play, but I kind of like it. Falling into the same category, Jellicent. Stage 1 Pokemon for 1 energy. Choose 3 energy cards from your opponent's discard pile and attach them to your opponent's Pokemon in any way that you like. Now, this is kind of cool against a bunch of decks, because if they're relying on using something like Super Rod in Extended or just Energy Retrieval in your Standard format, this allows you to basically screw them over by putting the energy on Pokemon which it's useless on and screwing them over entirely. Putting a Lightning Energy on a Deoxys does nothing, because Deoxys needs a Psychic and it needs a Plasma Energy. Now obviously that Lightning Energy could potentially help Deoxys to retreat in future, but that's a really flimsy kind of argument for doing so. So that's that. But it could also screw over things like in Extended Eels, or in the general format, Bronzong. Take that metal or electric energy from the discard pile and put it on something the opponent doesn't want it on. Or Plasma, same deal if it's based around their if it's based around Thundurus. Or any deck. You know, say you're playing against an Empoleon deck in Extended, you'd be able to take that water energy from the discard pile, put it onto a Mr. Mime or a Dusknoir, and then that's not going to be available for them to Super Rod back in and use with Empoleon. It's a cool little attack which has got some nice uses, but again, it's a stage 1, you're talking second turn of the game, you're using your attack on a 100 HP Pokemon. It's not going to do you much good. Now, Manectric EX is one we've talked about a little bit before, so I'm not going to go into too much detail, but we didn't know what its second attack did, and it basically does for a Lightning Colourless 120 if your opponent has a Pokemon tool attached to it. Not only is it likely to have a Pokemon tool attached to it, but don't forget we've already seen Head Noiser, which is a Team Flare tool that you attach to your opponent's Pokemon, so you know, there's another kind of argument to be made here that you can actually control this now. I've mentioned on the podcast and in my YouTube videos many times that, you know, I don't like cards that my opponent can control. Things like, I like Raichu, it depends on the size of my bench, but Mega Gengar EX makes me nervous because I'm relying on the attacks of Pokemon that my opponent puts into the field of play. But this now, you've got a bit more leverage yourself. It can one-hit an Evil Tal or a Lugia, and you can put the Pokemon tool on there to do so. Mega Manectric EX has got that brilliant attack for 2 energy, which allows you to attach energy from your discard pile to bench Pokemon. It's amazing. Now, by the way, just a reminder here, I should have said this right at the beginning. What I'm doing here is my first look. Now, I have got a little bit of opinion on, especially one of the cards, but most of these cards, I'm giving you my first impression. I've seen the scans, I'm telling you what I think. I generally go through my first impression the first time I see the cards here, and then when I go through my second run through, that's when the set is released in the UK, and then it's based around articles that I've read, because I scour all the websites, things my friends have told me, discussions on Facebook and other message boards. I do go around pretty much every site I can think of, so that you guys don't have to bother doing that. I'm nice like that. So if I miss something about a card, or I miss a card, etc., there might well be that I don't think it's worth mentioning, but it might just be that it's something which didn't strike me on first look. So if I do miss anything, make sure you tweet me at the Wassy, email me at ptcgradio@hotmail.co.uk, or if you're listening on SoundCloud, YouTube, WordPress, etc., just pop a comment down below. Moving further into Lightning, we see Pachirisu. It's got just the weirdest attack ever, and it's rubbish, and you'll never use it. But I want to point it out just for how bizarre and specific the attack is. Surprise Sticker. It does 10 damage, and until the end of your turn, your opponent's active Pokemon that was hit by this attack has its weakness changed to Lightning. So it does 10 damage, and it turns your opponent into a lightning weak or your opponent's active into a lightning weak Pokemon for one more turn. Maybe this could have some use as an opening Pokemon in Eels, maybe? So you could one-hit KO anything with regular Zekrom. Maybe you could use it with Manectric. I mean, honestly, I don't see this seeing much use. Although Eels decks generally don't have much to do on turn 1 or 2, so maybe Pachirisu could come in there. But honestly, you'd have to attack and then immediately hit them for weakness the next turn. It's so bizarre, I love it. Now, another card, which seems full of potential, is Joltik. Joltik, kind of like Magikarp, has always been one of those lovable loser Pokemon. It's got 30 HP. We're in 2014. We have Mega EXs with, I think, 230 HP. And yet, Joltik has 30 HP. It can be one-hit KO'd on the first turn of the game, going first, using a Laser Virbank. But it's got a fun little attack for a double colourless, Night March. 20 damage. This attack does 20 damage for each Pokemon that has Night March attack in your discard pile. Think of it kind of like Gyarados from Stormfront, except if the attack was on the Magikarp. The thing is that the Galvantula, from which that evolves from it, doesn't have a Night March attack. And usually when we see stuff like this with Round, you know, there's multiple Pokemon. I might be missing something here. But I'm looking at... No, I apologise, ladies and gentlemen. I have just, and this is something I'm discovering now, and I could stop this podcast and re-record it to sound more professional, but I like this podcast to be a little bit more conversational in tone. I don't want to sound too robotic. I have lied to you, ladies and gentlemen. A quick search on the website, pokebeach.com, that I'm looking at, actually reveals, strangely, that Lampent, the Stage 1 Chandelure Pokemon, has Night March. And this is for a Psychic double colourless. It does 20 times enough damage for each Pokemon that has Night March in your discard pile. And let's not forget that Chandelure EX has Fainting Spell. So although Chandelure kinda sucks, Lampent's got a decent attack. Not only that, but Pumpkaboo, the basic that evolves into Gourgeist, also has Night March. This is for 3 colourless energy, and it does, again, 20 damage times. That gives you a maximum of 11 Pokemon in the discard pile that have Night March. Because, I mean, there are 12, but one of them has to be active. Now, the really weird thing is here, if we remember decks like Round, it was Wigglytuff, and then you have kind of Palpitoad and Seismitoad. That's the way it generally tends to go. Here, you've got Pumpkaboo, the basic that evolves into Gourgeist, Joltik, the Stage 1, the basic that evolves into Galvantula, and then you've got Lampent, which evolves from Litwick and then into Chandelure. Now, I suppose this kind of makes sense, because it's the penultimate evolution in each line. But you've got 2 Psychic Pokemon, and you've got a Lightning Pokemon. You've got Pokemon that seem... they don't seem to have very much in common. I mean, you could kind of argue some kind of Halloween theme, I suppose, looking at, you know, Chandelure and Pumpkaboo. Oh, sorry, Lampent and Pumpkaboo. But not Joltik. Now, I suppose it kind of depends how lucky you feel. If you go with Joltik, you can just run the Stage 1s. Also, you can run kind of Pumpkaboo and Lampent, and you wouldn't even have to run the rest of these lines, and you could just go for Joltik. Basic Pokemon, double colourless energy, going in one turn. I mean, you could potentially, and it would take a hell of a turn to do so, but through a combination of kind of Bicycles and Ultra Balls, Juniper, etc., you could potentially, and it's asking a lot, but you could be hitting for 220 HP with a basic using 1 energy attachment on turn 1, and that basic is Joltik. People are going to make this deck. Now, the big problem you've got is that Joltik's got 30 HP, Lampent needs a Psychic double colourless, or if you've got the Stadium out, Psychic single colourless, and Pumpkaboo needs 3 colourless energy. Not only that, of course, but Pumpkaboo's got 60 HP, Lampent's got 80 HP, and Joltik's got 30 HP. So you're going to need to be recharging this every turn, and you're talking 2 energy attachments for Lampent and Pumpkaboo, and 1 energy attachment for Joltik. And I think, quite frankly, ladies and gentlemen, you can see how I missed this first time round. It seems very strange, but I like it. Now, the problem is, Joltik's the only one I can see being a viable attacker here, and he's got 30 HP. Your opponent doesn't even need an attacker, he just needs Laser Verbank. But it's kind of cool, and it can be powerful. Heck, all you actually need to do is get your 4 Lampent and your 4 Pumpkaboo in the discard pile. That gives you 160, and then that allows you to do 160 for DC on Joltik, and then the next turn 160 on Joltik, the next turn 160 for DCE on Joltik. I don't know how viable it is because of the low HP of the Pokemon and the fact that Joltik's the only one that attaches for 1 energy, but it sounds kind of cool. By the way, if anyone's wondering why I didn't just search Night March on this webpage earlier, it's because it's on my iPad and it's really difficult. Or it's easy and I just don't know how. The next Pokemon I want to have a look at is Heliolisk. Now again, this just isn't particularly good, but it's kind of potentially a nice little tech. In an Eels deck, this would of course be an extended, not in regular. Remember, unless I specifically say extended, I'm talking about the regular format. Heliolisk is a stage 1, it's got 90 HP, it's weak to fighting, blah blah blah, but it's reminiscent of Magnezone Prime for anyone that remembers that card. It's got the annoyingly hard to pronounce Valavola Spark, 30 damage, and you may discard as many lightning energy from your Pokemon as you like, and this does 30 damage times the number of lightning energy you discarded. You get 5 lightning energy on your bench Pokemon, discard them all, stick a muscle band on Heliolisk, 170, boom. Now, it's not particularly practical getting all that energy on your bench Pokemon. Even with 3 Eels out, you're going to take 2 turns to do it. And let's not forget, Heliolisk needs 2 energy to do this attack, and he's a stage 1. But taking all that aside, kind of like Joltik, I suppose, there's enough downsides to make you think this attack isn't particularly good, but it looks kind of cool, and somebody's clearly going to try and make it work. Moving into Psychic. Obviously, we've got Golbat and Crobat, we've spoken about them before. Gengar EX and Mega Gengar EX, we've spoken about them before. We've also got Wobbuffet, or however you want to pronounce it. It's got a cool little ability. As long as this Pokemon is your active Pokemon, all Pokemon in play in each player's hand and discard pile have no abilities excluding Psychic Pokemon. So it's all Pokemon in play, in the hand, and in the discard pile. So that means it would block stuff like, for instance, Ho-Oh EX, although that would have to be an extended because it's just been rotated out, and it would block stuff like Aldino. But it's got to be active and his attack sucks, so it's no good. Sorry about that. Mushana's a fun little one. It's like a lot of the Pokemon I'm talking about here. Now Muna's got a cool little attack which just lets you look at their hand for a Psychic Energy. Mushana, it's a stage 1, it's an attack, so you're talking about using this attack on your second turn of the game, so your opponent might get free turn. If your opponent goes first, they get 3 turns before you get an attack that isn't this. So it's awkward, but taking all of that out, it allows you to shuffle 3 cards from your discard pile into your deck. And they can be special energy cards, which are otherwise irrecoverable. Heck, they can be basic energy cards that you can't shuffle into your deck anymore. It's not a particularly good card, but there are some uses for it that we can see. Now, I told you about Pumpkaboo a minute ago when talking about Joltik. Gourgeist has another. It's potentially kind of cool. It would be worth running 1 or 2 as a tech if you were running one of these Joltik decks. Big Pumpkin. It's an ability. Whenever this Pokemon has a grass energy attached, its maximum HP is 200. Now, 200 HP on a Stage 1 Pokemon is phenomenal. This is above EX standard. This is up to Wailord standard. Although you'd have to have grass energy on a Psychic Pokemon that attacks for Psychic Energy, which is kind of awkward. Its attack is a Psychic Colourless, but do remember there's a Stadium which will bring that down to Psychic Colourless. The attack does 10 times the number of cards in your hand. Now, how often do you have an 18-card hand? Not often. And if you do, your opponent's going to end you. You could run this with things like roller skates, and you could try and run it with cards to kind of build up your hand. It's going to be very difficult to do so. It's got potential, but it's just another one of these Pokemon that Yeah, if you've got a giant hand, then you've got a Pokemon that's one-hitting anything, and it's got 200 HP. But the reality is, it's a stage 1, its attack is 2 separate energy attachments, it needs grass energy for its ability, psychic energy for its attack, and you need a giant hand anyway. Now, one card that I can see moving into fighting, one card that I can see seeing a little bit of play here is Glysaur. This has got a really fun attack called Joint Blind for 1 fighting energy. It's a stage 1 again. It does 20 damage. During your opponent's turn, your opponent cannot attach an energy from his or her hand to your opponent's active Pokemon that was hit by this attack. Now, they can still attach to their bench, and they can switch and all of that rubbish, but that isn't half going to be annoying. What you can also do is run this with something like Crushing Hammer to try and get rid of their energy while stopping them attaching it to the active. How often do you only have good Pokemon active? Think about it this way. You're playing against a Virizion Genesect deck. They leave a Virizion active, you can stop them attaching energy to it, while you Crushing Hammer the energy off of their bench Genesect. And you can basically stop them getting any energy onto their Virizion. Now again, we're talking about a stage 1, blah blah blah. I've made that point so many times now, I'm going to stop making it. But it's kind of cool. It's an interesting little attack that people could try and use. Now, going back into the interesting cards that no one's ever actually going to play, Gigalith. And this keeps happening to Gigalith. I like Gigalith. He's a kind of cool Pokemon. He's a kind of Pokemon that you could have on your bookshelf as a kind of a bookend. Not the actual Pokemon, he's huge. But, you know, a model of him, and he'd look kind of cool. He's a kind of cool looking Pokemon. But they keep screwing him over. 4 energy to do 60 damage one turn, and then it increases to 100 damage the next. That's ludicrous. 4 energy. What is cool, high density armor. If this Pokemon has no damage, any damage done to this Pokemon is reduced by 50. Instantly, any damage done to this dude is reduced by 50. That's awesome. Now, he's got a grass weakness, which is bad if you're facing Virizion Genesect. But think about something like Seismitoad. Seismitoad puts a muscle band on, it's hitting for 50. It does nothing. No damage counters go on there. The ability stays in play, and Seismitoad just hits you for nothing every turn. Which is kind of cool. Now again, as soon as they do any energy play, a Hypnotoxic Laser, etc., that goes away. So let's temper our kind of excitement somewhat, but it's still potentially kind of interesting. It's a nice little card. Speaking of Pokemon, which tend to have interesting cards printed for them, we're getting very close to the end of the Pokemon now. We see Spiritomb. And Spiritomb has a wonderful little attack for a dark and a colourless energy. And flip a coin, it does 30 damage. If heads, discard an energy attached to your opponent's active Pokemon. And you could run this kind of like I said with Glysaur, whereby you would run it with a bunch of Crushing Hammer, and if it's reprinted at any point soon, Enhanced Hammer. And you just run this as an energy denial deck. It is a basic, so essentially your opponent attaches on turn 1 of the game, and then you can just go ahead and use this turn 2. But this actually has a very specific role to be played. It is a Virizion Genesect counter. The one way that everybody can try and beat Virizion Genesect, as I've said many times on this podcast since the Virizion Genesect became a thing, Virizion Genesect needs 2 energy attachments for Emerald Slash. Now you might be thinking, yes, but a lot of them are playing stuff like Beartic. Oh, whoop-de-doo, I've got a retreat cost of 1, you're hitting me for 40, and then I'm going to bring up something off my bench and kill you with it. Yeah, maybe they're playing Raichu and they one-hit your Spiritomb, but then you kill the Raichu, they've still got no energy attached, and then you can just keep doing this again. It attacks for a colourless energy, so this Spiritomb could go into any deck. You run it with the Victini with all the flips and stuff, and essentially what that allows you to do is, and even with the Victini with the flips, that's the Victini that's got the ability that allows you to reflip on attack if you hit a Tails. Even with that, you've still only got a 75% chance of discarding their energy. But let's put it this way. And just so we're clear, that Victini with Victory Star was reprinted in Legendary Treasures, so it's still going strong. It's still in the format. That means that essentially 3 out of every 4 turns, your opponent attaches an energy to Virizion, and you get rid of it straight away. Your opponent runs out of energy, Virizion Genesect dies. Now, it's a weird little tech for Virizion Genesect, I agree. But if you're playing something like Seismitoad with no other counters, why wouldn't you? Just play your Spiritomb down, and just every turn, just get rid of the energy. Now, your opponent, of course, would try and counter this by just, putting energy on a bench Genesect and bringing a Genesect up and killing it, but that's what you want to happen. Your opponent brings up a Genesect, your opponent kills that Spiritomb, and then all your opponent's got is one Genesect with free energy attached, you kill that, and they're back to square one. And they've taken one prize card, you've taken two. The interesting thing is, one of the coolest cards at the moment that screws over Virizion Genesect is the Spiritomb with the ability which stops your opponent playing their Ace Spec card, meaning that the Virizion Genesect player cannot play down their G-Booster. Now, I'm not implying for a second that you stick this Spiritomb into your deck and all of a sudden you beat Virizion Genesect. What I am saying is, this is a card that if you play it with Victini, you're talking 2 spots in your deck. It's a basic, which attacks for 1 energy, and on a coin flip, allows you to discard an energy attached to your opponent's active Pokémon. And that will completely and utterly screw Virizion Genesect, if you can keep hitting heads. It's an idea. Take it or leave it. Feel free to disagree, although don't call me an idiot for this kind of thing, because I happen to think it's a pretty good idea. There are some decks out there, and there will always be some decks out there that struggle with Virizion Genesect. And rather than doing something ridiculous like putting in a Victini and using your Ace Spec to do Victory Piece, which is just going to be an easy 2 prizes for the first Genesect that comes out, run something like this, stick a couple of Crushing Hammers in, and see where you go. Regardless, imagine, this could be kind of cool for something like when you're facing down a Seismitoad, for instance. Get rid of their energy, they're going to be sad quite quickly. Now, there are just a couple more Pokemon to look at, but a couple of them are EXs. The first one is Malamar EX. Why Malamar gets an EX and Mamoswine doesn't, I do not understand. This is verging on offensive to me. Ooh, we don't have enough Dark EXs. No, we've only got Crocodile and Bloomin' Darkrai and Eviltal, and don't point out there's loads of water Pokemon EXs, I know that's true. I would just be the happiest person that ever lived if there was a Mamoswine EX, and I've got to sit here while we don't get a Mamoswine EX, and they release bloomin' Malamar. That, ladies and gentlemen, ain't fair. The card, however, it's one of these cards which I think will be dynamite in Extended, and potentially viable in Standard. Ability, Powerful Hypnosis. When you attach an energy card from your hand to this Pokemon, your opponent's Pokemon is now asleep. That's pretty cool. Automatic sleep if you attach an energy to your hand. And again, remember, these are Japanese translations. These are not official English wordings. Things could change when they're revealed in English. That goes for all the cards I'm talking about. But it's just any energy at the moment. And as we know, automatic status conditions are fun. And they help us out. So we've got that. What we also have is a pretty decent attack. For a dark and a colourless, flip a coin for each energy attached to this Pokemon, 60 damage times the number of heads. Now again, we are talking about the current translation, but it says energy, not energy card. The basic rule, for those of you that don't know, if it says energy card, double colourless energy counts once, it's one energy card. If, however, it says energy, double colourless counts twice, because double colourless energy is 2 energy. That means that is 2 coin flips. Now again, you would need to play this with the Victory Star Victini I've just been talking about with Spiritomb, but how cool is this card? You put 3 energy on there, you flip 3 heads, and you're doing 180 damage. Now, you really need to pile the energy on here. So, you need something like Dark Patch. Having said that, remember, one of the cards I'm not talking about today is Bronzong. A stage 1 which attaches metal energy from your discard to one of your bench Pokemon. Malamar needs 1 dark and the rest colourless. Can you say Malamar Bronzong, ladies and gentlemen? You get 3 Bronzong out. Dark energy, 3 metal, you flip 4 coins, 60 for each head. That's pretty darn good. And if that Malamar gets knocked out, well, who cares? You've got 3 more energy coming. It's got a weakness to fighting, which kind of sucks. But, you know, it's one of the downsides against it, certainly. It's fighting weak. But it's got a cool ability which will buy you turns. I mean, put it this way, sleep is big. I just played a fun little game with an Evolutions deck against a really quite well-made new version Evil Tal, Garbodor. And the only reason I could have won anyway if I'd played more conservatively. But with the mistakes that I made, and again, that's a big thing to say, but even with the mistakes that I made, I would have won the game, except when I had the chance to knock out his only Trubbish, he hit heads on a Hypnotoxic Laser, I hit tails, I whiffed a switch, and my opponent had a free turn while damage built up on my active Pokemon, and I got to do nothing but attach an energy. That, ladies and gentlemen, is a good thing. That's what Malamar gives you. By the way, that wasn't supposed to be me moaning about the game I've just played. It's supposed to be an illustration of how good Malamar can be. Not only that, but if you can find a way to pile energy onto this guy, and maybe you use the Stage 2 Hydreigon I've talked about, which attaches from the deck. Maybe you're playing an Extended and you use Dark Patch. Maybe you use Bronzong or Electric with just mostly Metal and a couple of Dark Energy. Maybe you put DCE in here. I don't know, but if you can find a way to pile energy onto Malamar, it's a very interesting card. But remember, ladies and gentlemen, it's weak to fighting. Now, the other EX I haven't talked about yet is Florges EX. And again, it's new and it sucks. Why does it get an EX when Mamoswine doesn't? Annoys me, ladies and gentlemen. It's a beautiful card. It's got a lovely little border of colourful flowers, which goes very nicely with the psychedelic, multicoloured theme that we're seeing with cards in this set. But the fact of the matter is, it's annoying. Bring me Mamoswine EX for the love of all that is good and holy. Now, it's a Fairy type EX, 160 HP, which is slightly lower than standard, kind of like Ho-Oh, but not enough to be a big problem. Key thing here, good resistance to darkness, good weakness to metal, because nobody's playing metal. Until this set comes out. And metal gets all that support with Edgeslash and Bronzong. And if metal starts seeing a big increase in play, which has a good chance it will, all of a sudden this becomes a terrible weakness. But, you know, I digress. First attack, 1 Fairy Energy, search your deck for a supporter card, reveal it, put it into your hand. Not ideal, you can be ended out of it, etc., but it's good if you're drawing dead turn 1. Second attack, Fairy and a colourless, so not much energy. 20 damage times the number of Grass and Fairy Pokemon you have in play. If you have entirely Grass and Fairy Pokemon and you fill your bench, that's 120 damage for 2 energy. With a Muscle Band is 140, with a Laser Verbank is 170. Now, we are talking 6 Grass or Fairy Pokemon in play, and a Muscle Band, and a Verbank, and a Laser, so it's a fair amount to ask for, but there is potential there. I don't think it's going to be great or see a lot of play, but there is potential there. And there's been a bit of a theme in today's podcast. There's a bunch of Pokemon, we've talked about Pyro and Spiritomb as 2 of these, that are kind of destined to always get kind of funky, interesting cards. Now, Slurpluff's already had one. It's a Stage 1 Fairy Pokemon, 90 HP. It's already had one interesting card where it basically blocked status conditions for anything with a Fairy Energy attached. And this one allows you to draw a card, but if it's active, draw another card. Now, it's only got a retreat cost of 1, and you can stick a Floatstone, etc. on it. But essentially, essentially you draw a card, but if your Pokemon gets knocked out, then you stick Slurpuff active, draw 2 cards, retreat him into your attacker. Or even stick a Floatstone on him, and, you know, use something like switch into another Pokemon, and then, you know, draw 2 cards and retreat Slurpluff. It's a cool little card which allows you to draw more, and heck, it can be used with that Gorgeist. The attack for a Fairy and a double colourless does 60 damage, and during your opponent's next turn prevent all effects of attacks done by your opponent's Pokemon. It doesn't say damage, so it still damages, and it's got 90 HP, so I'm afraid, ladies and gentlemen, it ain't lasting very long. And that brings me to the final Pokemon that I want to talk about before we get on to a couple of trainer cards, Blissey. Rush Charge for 4 colourless energy, 60 damage, you may do 20 more damage. If you do, Blissey does 20 more to itself. Meh. 3 colourless energy. And remember, it's a Stage 1 and it's fighting weak, and it evolves from a Pokemon that's fighting weak. Although a basic that has 100 HP, which is pretty good. And 130 HP on a Stage 1 is nothing to sniff at. But its first attack, 3 colourless energy, flip a coin. This attack If heads, this attack does 10 damage times the amount of damage counters on your benched Pokemon. How many games have you had where you're retreating your benched Pokemon, you've got like 200-300 damage on your benched Pokemon? Essentially, if you hit heads, you do to the active equal damage to the number of damage counters on all of your benched Pokemon. But come on, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, you've got to have a bench full of damaged Pokemon. Secondly, you've got to hit heads. And yeah, we got that Victory Star Victini, which I've already talked about a couple of times today. It's a real kind of Hail Mary kind of Pokemon. I'm going to lose, I need a big attack, I need a big KO now, this is on the bench, let's stick free energy on it and go. I don't think it's actually good, but it's funky. There is a Regigigas in this set, and the artwork is beautiful. It's a wonderful card, it's a beautiful card, and it sucks. Sorry if you're expecting any more about Regigigas, it's just terrible. I wish it wasn't. Now again, some of these trainers we've talked about, and we are 45 minutes in, but there's no point going through half now, half next week. I want to go through it all now. We aren't going to have time for my tournament report. I will make sure you get that next week. Let's go through some of these trainers. First of all, Target Whistle. Choose a basic Pokemon from your opponent's discard pile and put that Pokemon onto your opponent's bench. This is cool. It brings back the Honchkrow that people were playing back in the SP era. Now, there's several things that this does. You bring a weak Pokemon onto the bench and kill it with bench damage, or you bring it onto the bench and you Lysandra up and kill it. Target Whistle Lysandra is going to be a huge combo, which I expect to see people using. Oh, you've got a 50 HP Pokemon in your discard pile. Pull it onto the bench, bring it active with Lysandra, boom, you kill it. Anyone that plays Jirachi, if that Jirachi, I mean, essentially, somebody can play a Jirachi, you Lysandra and kill it. Target Whistle it onto the bench, Lysandra and kill it. Target Whistle it onto the bench, Lysandra and kill it. You know, you can kill the same weak EX Pokemon 3 times for the win. Now, whether you're going to want to play 2 Target Whistles and 3 Lysandra in your deck, I don't know. But the fact is, it's there. I mean, certainly, I would want to play this in a Pyroar deck. If I've got that many potential gust effects from the Pyroar discarding Fire Energy, you can bet your bottom dollar I'm going to want to be playing this card. But it's got other uses as well. You can screw over your opponent by taking up their last bench space with a worthless Pokemon to stop them. You know, if you're worried they're going to bench something, you know, if you're thinking, oh, if they bench another Mewtwo, I'm going to lose a Mewtwo war. I'm just going to Target Whistle a Landorus onto your bench. Gutted. You know, these are the kind of things you would do. You would basically take up their bench space, or you would, I mean, even against something like Flareon, for instance, you could kind of take a Pokemon from their discard pile to take 10 damage away from what they're doing. If you're playing against a Joltik deck, you could do the same thing, bring a Joltik onto their bench. This basically allows you to give an easy Pokemon on the bench for you to kill, either with bench damage if it's really weak, or to gust it up and kill it if it's kind of weak. Or you can fill up their bench space so they can't use it with what they want. Or you can bring a Pokemon that they want in the discard pile active. Imagine if your opponent's playing a Ho-Oh deck in Extended, and you bring the Ho-Oh onto the bench. That's going to be annoying. The next card, which is another really good card, is Battle Compressor. Now these cards, they're Team Flare Gear cards, which presumably means at some point you're going to be able to search for Team Flare gear with a supporter or something, which will be kind of cool. Search your deck for up to 3 cards and discard them. This, ladies and gentlemen, is a fantastic, phenomenal card, and I hope you'll see how good this is. I'm playing Flareon, boom, 3 Pokemon in the discard pile, I'm doing 30 more damage. I'm playing Bronzong, or in Extended I'm playing Electric, boom, free energy in the discard pile, ready to go. I'm playing a Dark deck in Extended, or with Yveltal Non-EX in Standard, boom, free Dark energy in the discard pile, and because you're going from your deck and your deck is secret, it can be 1 or 2. This is brilliant. This is a phenomenal card. There are so many, and I'm really hyped up about this card. I haven't heard anybody talking about this card since it was released. Everyone's focused on things like Lysandra's Last Resort, and we'll get to that in a minute, and Manectric EX and Mega Manectric EX, but this, in any card that needs cards in the discard pile, this is utterly brilliant, and I love it. Another card which I'm in love with is Substitute Robot, the last Team Flare Gear card. You may play this card as a colourless 30 HP basic Pokémon as your active Pokémon. You may discard it at any time during your turn. This card cannot retreat, and even if your opponent knocks out this Pokémon, doesn't take a prize. So you can only play it, if you've got a full bench you can't play this. But essentially, if you don't have a full bench, you put it as your active goes to the bench, you've got a Pokémon with 30 HP active. Now your opponent's going to kill that, but here's the genius, your opponent doesn't take a prize card. If you put that into the active, and your opponent doesn't have a Lysandra, or a Red Signal, or an Escape Rope, or anything else to get that out of the active, then your opponent essentially wastes their attack for the turn. Even if you don't want to play it, and that's a good enough reason to play it by itself. Think about it this way. If you don't have a full bench, it's a switch. You put it active, your Pokemon goes to the bench, you discard it, choose what to put active because you need to put in an active Pokemon, boom. You've just used switch. Except it's got the extra value of, holy cow, I have nothing to do this turn, what am I going to do? I'm going to stick a substitute robot active and my opponent's going to waste their attack. It's a brilliant card. It is going to force people to play Gusting Effects and Escape Rope. Because if you're playing neither any Gusting Effects nor Escape Rope in your deck, this card is going to royally screw you over. It's going to basically tilt the prize card in your opponent's favour. Substitute Robot is a brilliant card. Electric Spirit Link. It's exactly like Gengar Spirit Link. I told you it was coming. I don't want to say any more about that. As a side note, still no retrospective Spirit Links for the Mega EXs which you've already had. So, last couple of cards. I count 4 more cards we need to look at. Jamming Net. This is the other Team Flare's Hyper Gear. We've seen Head Noiser. Jamming Net, you attach it to your opponent's Pokemon. Pokemon EX. Remember that Head Noiser and Jamming Net only work on EXs. That's something I should have mentioned before. I know I've mentioned Head Noiser a couple of times. I don't think I've talked about it on a non-EX. But if I have, let me correct myself. It only works on EXs. Same thing with Jamming Net. The Pokemon this card is attached to does 20 less damage to the defending Pokemon. Not only that, of course, but they can't put a Muscle Band on. So you put this on a Seismitoad, and instead of doing 50 with a Muscle Band, they're doing 10. You put this on a Seismitoad and stick up something with water resistance, and Seismitoad does no damage. It's brilliant. I love it. Here's what I'm thinking, though. Our decks are already pretty tight. You've all got 60 card lists that you like, I imagine. How many substitute robots are you going to find room for? How many target whistles are you going to find room for? How many jamming nets and head noises are you going to find room for? Yeah, you want to put jamming net on your opponent's Pokemon. What are you going to cut for it? Have a think now. What card in your deck are you willing to cut for this tech card? Crushing Hammer is an amazing card if you hit a heads. Enhanced Hammer was an amazing card against any deck that played Special Energy. But the fact of the matter is, not many people ended up playing them because they didn't have room in their decks, and you need attackers and you need consistency cards. I love these Team Flare Hyper Gear cards. I just don't see how much play they're going to get. Xerasic is a supporter. Choose one Special Energy or Pokemon tool attached to you or your opponent's Pokemon and discard it. It's weak source for a supporter. As choose one of your Pokemon and return that Pokemon and its attached pre-evolution to your hand. Discard all other cards attached to it. We've talked about this before. Just play Cassius. It's better. Dimensional Valley, we've seen. Mystery Energy, we've seen. They're both really good cards that are going to help out Psychic a lot. And the only other card, well, 2 other cards. One is, what's it called? Steel Shelter. It's essentially remove all special conditions from Metal Pokemon. Metal Pokemon cannot be affected by special conditions. It's kind of like a Virizion, or that Cloak we've seen in Furious Fist, but it only works on Metal Pokemon. If you're running an all-metal deck and you don't have a stadium, this could be a good shout. Now, the final card has been kind of controversial. It's called Lysandra's Last Resort. Not Lysander's Last Resort, and I did on YouTube. I did make a promise I was going to stop saying Lysandra, not Lysander, just as an exception to my rule, and I am going to stop saying that, and I have stopped saying that, it's another card with Lysandra in, don't pronounce it wrong. All those people that have been telling me, yes, but we're in England, so we can pronounce it Lysander. No, you can't. Because it's a French name. You can mispronounce it slightly. Lysandra, Lysandra, etc. They're slight mispronunciations based on your cultural dialect. Lysander is misreading it because it ends RE not ER. And I know a lot of people are bored of me having made this argument online a few times, so I'm not going to go into much detail with this. I don't want you to turn off. But just to make my position perfectly clear, Lysander is spelled Lysandeer. Of course cultural dialects allow you to slightly mispronounce names in other cultures, of course they do. What they don't allow you to do is jumble up the order of the letters and read it wrong. That's why it's not Lysander. Lysander would be ER. It's just reading the word, it's not what it says. Plus, be a bit respectful to French. I don't expect your pronunciation of Lysandra to be perfect, and I know for a fact mine isn't. I've spoken to French teachers about this. But it's not Lysander, that's not how it's spelt, and it's not a simple, I'm from a different country, I'm going to pronounce it how I like. That's a kind of rude attitude, because to be honest with you, ladies and gentlemen, you're reading it wrong. I'm sorry for calling you rude, I didn't mean, let's not fall out. Please don't stop listening. So Lysandra's Last Resort, this is far more important. This is a very, very good card. It allows you to shuffle all the cards from your discard pile into your deck, excluding any Lysandra's Last Resort, and forces your opponent to shuffle all of... Essentially, both players take their discard pile and shove it into their decks and start again. Now, I've seen a lot of people saying this is rubbish. Oh, good golly, it is not. I'm playing against a Bronzong player. Now you've got no metal energy in the discard pile. But for things like, it screws over Flareon, which is really sad, given that there's a card that really helps Flareon in this set, at the same time as a card which really screws over Flareon. But this is amazing. Imagine like a Speed Lugia deck. I'm out of Plasma Energy, and I've used all my Chorus machines. It doesn't matter. Now they're all back in my deck. Think about Virizion Genesect. I don't need to play Energy Retrieval or Super Energy Retrieval. I'm going to use all my Grass Energy, and then I'm going to let it go to the discard pile, and then I'm going to play this, and it's all back in my deck again. Not only that, but if you ever wanted an anti-N card, this is it, ladies and gentlemen. And I do enjoy the kind of cool thing about the leader of Team Flare, Lysandra, screwing over the leader of Team Plasma, N, by kind of neutralising the respective supporters. Essentially, think about it this way. I'm playing Speed Lugia. I take 4 prizes really early. My opponent ends me, and I'm going to draw rubbish because I'm drawing 2 cards. And I've used a bunch of cards. But if I use Lysandra's Last Resort, I'm basically resetting my deck. Which means all of my bicycle, my roller skates, all of my supporters are now back in my deck. In fact, the only things that aren't in my deck are the Pokémon Energy and Pokémon Tool cards which are on my field of play. What that means is that my ratio of consistency cards, the proportion of them in my deck, is higher than when I start the game. Because essentially, all of my supporters and consistency cards are back in my deck, but my deck is slightly smaller because I've got a bunch of Pokemon Energy and Pokemon Tool cards that are on my field of play, meaning there are the same number of consistency cards in a slightly smaller deck. Which means when I'm end to 2, yes, I've got a larger deck into which I'm being end, but I've got a greater chance of drawing a consistency card from that end. I love Lysandra's Last Resort, and I've seen a lot of people talking bad about it, and I don't blame them, to be honest, because again, how many of these are you going to find room for in your deck? But in full-on speed decks like Lugia, where you are really going to run through all of your trainer-based consistency cards early and then be end low, or where you're going to run out of Chorus Machine and Plasma Energy, this is gold dust. Same thing with decks like Virizion Genesect that really need that energy back in their deck and currently don't have a way to do so, or to screw over decks like Bronzong, or just, like I say, helping you out if you go run through too much of your deck too fast. Also, if you've ever got a deck that you're worried about, decking out with, don't worry. That's never going to happen when you're playing this card. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is Phantom Forces. I've had my rant about Lysandra, and I promise you, ladies and gentlemen, that's it. I'm done with that now. I've had me say, and I think we should all leave it be. Although, for the record, if I play you in a tournament and you start bringing me that weak sauce, we're going to have trouble. I'll still be nice. I like people. And we've talked about all the good cards. Now, we've left out all the ones I've previously talked about because there's no real point doing so again. And to be honest, ladies and gentlemen, we've run to an hour. I don't think we need to keep going with this. I think we're kind of done at this stage. I think we've done as much as we need to do. But it's something which I wanted to bring to your attention. I've gone through all of these cards, all the new ones, all the ones you should be worried about, all the ones that you need to know about, and hopefully that's been interesting and exciting for you. Hopefully you know everything you need to know about Phantom Forces. Remember, you can find me on Twitter at @TheWassy, or you can email me at ptcgradio@hotmail.co.uk if you've got any questions, comments, queries, or quibbles about anything that I have said. Don't forget also that I've got my YouTube channel, PTCG Radio, on YouTube. Just search for it there, or if you want the direct link, it's youtube.com/user/PTCG Radio, or even just Google YouTube PTCG Radio. It's going quite well. I'm up to 497 subscribers at the moment. That's going up quite nicely. Continue, please, going and subscribing. Spread the word with that, ladies and gentlemen. At the moment, I'm getting up 2 videos a week along with my podcast, which is still just an audio file behind a picture, but, I've got to have time to do other stuff. And I'm doing that very regularly, and it's because it's growing. People are watching it. That's the thing that keeps me going here. Please continue to spread the word if you're doing so already. Go and tell a friend. Most of you have got friends that play Pokemon. Hopefully, I'm hoping that you are going to be able to, I'm hoping that you're already going to be subscribed. If you're not, please go and do so now. If you are, you must have Pokemon friends. Please go and get them to subscribe. The Top Cut have thousands of subscribers. I'm getting up to 500. I'm gaining in popularity on YouTube, and that's awesome, but I want to do more. The more people that subscribe, the more I'm going to be keeping this up. And as we're into a new format and a new season, I've already recorded 1 game per round at my first League Challenge, and I'm going to continue to attempt to do so at all the tournaments I go to throughout the year. So please go and subscribe to that and all that good stuff. We've broken an hour. It's been a little while since we've broken an hour, but as I've said, I don't want to do half this week, half next week. Let's just go through this. We have done so. Thank you very much for listening. As always, I hope you have a lovely week. My name's Ross, and you've been listening to PTCG Radio.